Continuing on with our sheep and goat health discussion. So after we've talked about our common diseases, and there are a few vaccinations available for them, here's a chart showing the vaccinations most commonly used. You have the enterotoxemia, type C and D, and tetanus highlighted here. That is because it is typically combined as one vaccination, referred to as CD&T vaccination. Your next highest percentage one used is your 8-way, and a lot of those 7 or 8-way, a lot of those are usually given if you have an area where you have additional diseases present. You have a few that are in here that you can give to help prevent abortion. So just kind of gives you an idea of the flock managers out there and the most commonly given vaccinations. All right, so talking about vaccinations, we'll kind of discuss a little bit about the routes used for giving vaccinations. Most vaccines are given subcutaneously or sub-Q, and what this does, it goes into the skin, under the skin, into the fat layer. Typically, it's given at an angle. The other way of accomplishing that is if you can tint the skin up and go in there, that'll get you to where you need to be. Some vaccines are given intramuscularly or IM. What this is going into the muscle. Typically, whenever you give this kind of a shot, it's going at a 90-degree angle. So it's going in perpendicular to the skin. It's going straight into the muscle. This is usually for your longer lasting, longer acting. It's also used for medications. Your longer acting medications for some of your antibiotics are given this way. You may give it topically or on the skin. You may give vaccine intranasally or in the nose. Typically, if you're given subcutaneous vaccinations, you're going to use a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch 18 or 20 gauge needle. Subcutaneous vaccination should be given over the ribs, behind the armpit, or high up on the neck. Whenever you're drawing your vaccine from your vial, you want to make sure that you use one needle for that, and it's not the same needle used to inject the animal. That way you don't get cross-contamination into the actual vaccine vial. You need to make sure that you're reading and following the label directions carefully. Any deviation from the label directions should only be done under the direction of a veterinarian. All your vaccines should be stored, handled, and administered properly. Most vaccines need to be kept refrigerated. Only your healthy sheep and goats should be vaccinated. And this goes the same thing with humans. You don't want to give somebody a vaccine if they're not feeling good. Generally, if your immune system's already compromised, giving them a vaccine or vaccination is only going to make things worse. You don't want to vaccinate wet sheep or goats. It's just because the bacteria that they can have on their hair or wool can be carried with the needle as you're penetrating the skin and cause a potential abscess in that area. Some additional routes for giving vaccinations but not typically used is oral. In other words, giving it in the mouth, and then subdermal, which is right under the skin. Subdermal is typically used in allergy testing. There are a few vaccines that are given that way. In your overall flock health program, there's probably a few things to take into consideration, and some folks are going to look up and go, well, I don't want to vaccinate. It's your prerogative not to vaccinate. And you may talk to other producers that say they don't vaccinate and they haven't suffered any consequences. If you really started investigating, I think you'd find that they probably are being affected by production issues. They just don't want to realize that maybe they're poor performers, or their lack of getting a lamb this year or a kid was because of not vaccinating. So they may be being affected by a disease that hasn't really manifested, but it's subtle and it's affecting them. Some producers will vaccinate for everything just because they're like, I don't want to have any potential for anything to affect my herd. Okay, okay, that's your prerogative. Vaccination is a form of risk management. So you as a producer need to weigh the pros and cons of vaccinating for a specific disease. The best way to do this is sit down and develop a good relationship with your veterinarian and have a real discussion with them about what type of diseases are in your area, the types of economic impacts those diseases can have on your flock. You'll find that most vaccinations are not that expensive. If you go for a very minimal health program, you're looking at probably $1 per sheep per year, all the way up to the excessive I'm vaccinating for everything program, running about $9 per animal per year. The question becomes, in this is, if you don't vaccinate and you have a flock of, say, 50 animals, and those 50 animals on average cost you $500, can you afford to lose $25,000 worth of livestock because you didn't vaccinate your animals and you have a disease come through that wipes out your entire flock? Even if it only affects half of your flock, you're still looking at about a $12,000 to $15,000 loss, versus if you'd paid, let's say, $3 per animal per year and potentially not lose anybody to the disease at least. Can you afford not to vaccinate? That was really probably the bigger question in all of this. I know with my flock, I've only got 33 animals out there right now. My average cost per animal is sitting at about $300. I know I can't afford to lose them because of not vaccinating my animals, and I'm just getting started out. So, food for thought. Think about it. Have a really good discussion with your local veterinarian, because there are things you can do to mitigate your risk. Again, I have it up here again. When developing your flock health program, consult with your veterinarian. And you want to try to make sure you find one that deals with ruminants, as they're more versed in the problems that the animals will face, versus if you find a small or a pet vet. It's not saying that the pet vet doesn't know. It's just they specialize in the small animals, and they may have forgotten some of that stuff that they had to learn when they went through veterinarian school. Up here, I also have a few resources for you to be able to go to and find out some additional information. The Sheep and Goat Extension, they're on Facebook for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. They put on a lot of little 10 to 15 minute video segments dealing with a lot of different topics about sheep and goats, from economic issues to production issues to health issues and whatnot. So I'd really recommend getting on there and following them. Just because you can always go back and later and pull those up and take a look at them and find some information out. Really good information too. In this segment, we're going to talk about basic sheep and goat nutrition. Nutrition needs of all livestock continue to change. It's almost on a daily basis as genetic advances are made and as research is done. The genetic improvements are based on what the livestock are being produced for. So you could have it for milk, meat, a combination. Each production system typically requires a different feeding system. You can do testing of your available forages out in your pasture, and it's recommended to do it so that if you have any deficiencies in protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals, you can address these either in supplements or vitamin and mineral licks or loose versions of these. Deficiencies in the forages and soils can vary from region to region as well as property to property. Highly recommend getting your forage tested. Your sheep and goats are highly adaptable to many different management systems, and typically their productivity is largely dependent upon the amount and quality of nutritional resources available. Typically, providing for the nutrient needs of your animals represents the single largest expense in raising the animal. About 5% of all ewes will fail to lamb, and about 10 or 15 to 20% of all lambs and kids born die between birth and weaning. Most of the time, this is from nutritional failures. There can be other issues, but generally, in the producers that have tracked this information, it usually falls into nutrition. All right, so when we talk about nutrients, a lot of folks will look up, oh, okay, we're thinking about the feed. Well, we got to think about exactly what the animal needs in order to thrive. Nutrients are of primary importance in nutrition, and they are constituted by water, carbohydrates, protein, minerals, and vitamins. A lot of folks will look up, well, what? Water? But yes, water is probably your number one and your number one limiter on how well your animals will do. You need an adequate, clean supply of fresh water in order for the sheep and goats to be able to thrive. Inadequate water consumption reduces feed and forage intake, which means that your animals are not going to produce as much weight and be able to take care of offspring. Stagnant water, poor quality water, water with odor, high temperature, or frozen, or bacterial count can lead to poor consumption of the water. So it's always a good idea to make sure that your water sources are clean and that you don't have issues with the water sources. Water intake will vary from just shy of 3/4 of a gallon of water during cold months to 1.5 gallons during like your spring and fall type months, and up to just a little over 2 gallons during your summer type months. Carbohydrates, these are your energy, and insufficient energy leads to poor performance in the sheep and goats, more than any other nutritional deficiency. Could be caused by inadequate amounts of feed or forage, or low quality feed and forage. Extended periods of energy deficiency may impact production for 2 to 3 months after adequate energy intake is resumed. So this is one of those that people will be like, oh, I noticed they're not doing well. May realize, oh crap, I haven't been feeding them, or they haven't been able to get enough carbohydrates, and they start feeding like, oh, why are they still not really doing well? This is why, because it could take 2 to 3 months for the body to recoup from that missing energy. Protein, which on the feed label you'll see it labeled as CP or crude protein. Typically, the quantity of protein supplied in diet is more critical than protein quality. Ruminants have the ability to convert lower quality protein sources to high quality proteins by bacterial action. You just got to make sure you get the right quantity in there. Protein supplementation is often necessary during drought and water supply is often short. Minerals, they play into their production. Animals that are consuming less mineral than what their body requires, especially if it's in the marginal deficiency area, it may have subtle effects on productivity, but significant effects on your profitability. You may have animals out there that looks like they're getting plenty of forage or plenty of feed, but it's missing some minerals, or a lot of the minerals may be at the borderline deficient area, and they're just not putting on the weight and growing as fast as they should be. What happens is now, instead of maybe getting a lamb to market in 10 months, now it's maybe taking you 12, 13, 14 months before you're able to get them up to the weight that you ideally would like to take them to the market. So now you got an extended time that you're retaining them. In addition, they still may not be at the weight needed. So that affects your bottom line, because typically you're paid by weight per pound, or your dollar per pound, sorry. You can see up here the minerals that have been identified as essential in sheep nutrition. And I know a lot of folks will hear that copper is one that sheep aren't supposed to have. And it's not that they're not supposed to have it. It's just that they require very minimal amounts of it. And typically the forage that they get already contains enough for them. If you add any excess in there, it can actually become toxic to them because you've gone over the amount that they actually need. It's highly recommended not to feed sheep straight goat feed, as goat feed is typically supplemented with a higher concentration of copper, as the goats normally require more copper than sheep do. If you're raising them together, it's ideal if you can find a way to separate the sheep and goats out and provide mineral that contains the extra copper for the goats. Your vitamins are typically fat soluble for the A, D, E, and K vitamins, and those are required. Typically, vitamin supplementation is not needed because vitamins are synthesized, or the forage feed already provides them in the adequate amounts. Vitamins A and E may need to be supplemented in special circumstances, such as dry or winter pasture grazing or dry lot, lush pastures, or high quality legume hays being consumed. You may see vitamin D deficiencies in confined sheep. Vitamin E is usually supplemented. It helps boost immune function. And that's something whenever we go through, one of the pastes I have is selenium and vitamin E for the sheep. Again, it usually helps with their immune function. So while we're on the topic of nutrition, we want to talk about body condition scoring of the sheep. And I have two different charts up here. If you're to put these up here, one may be a little bit easier to understand than the other. Ideally, for your breeding ewes and does, you want to keep them in a body condition of 3. Whenever you put them into breed, you want them on the high side of a 3. And that way, when they birth and nurse, they should be at the low side of 3. And it doesn't take as long for you to be able to get them reconditioned and able to rebreed. I use an accelerated lambing cycle. So instead of just getting one crop of lambs a year, I'll get 3 crops of lambs every 2 years. With their gestation cycle of 5 months, and I usually wean somewhere between 2 and 2.5 months, depending upon the weight of the lambs. I can get them back in to rebreed and should be bred by 8 months. So every 8 months, I've got a lamb crop coming out versus a lot of folks that will do every 2 years or a lamb crop every year. So if you think about it, if I have 10 ewes and they all typically give me twins, if I go on a conventional lambing cycle, that'd be 2 crops in 2 years. With twins, that would give me 20 lambs a year, so 40 lambs total. If I do the accelerated lambing cycle, I can do, I'll get 60 lambs in 2 years. So I get 20 additional lambs over somebody that's in a conventional cycle. So, and that all ties back to nutrition. If you keep them on the nutrition level that they need to be at, they can rebreed faster and give you those additional lambs. Just some kind of quick tips. And I like this one. Again, it's a way to keep track of your nutritional status of your flock. 3 being ideal. Basically what it is, you've got your lumbar that have 3 projections that look like flattened fingers. That's your spinal process. What you're feeling for is how well you can or cannot feel that spinal process. With the body condition score of 1, the processes are prominent and sharp, and you can probably visually assess that standing away from the animal. You're going to see everything. It looks like an emaciated animal. With the body condition score of 2, your processes still feel prominent. You may not be able to detect by visual appraisal the processes like you did with the body condition score of 1, as they're going to have some meat covering that now, but if you feel, you're definitely going to feel it, no problem. Body condition score of 3, it looks like a nice healthy animal, not too fat, not too skinny. If you're doing a visual appraisal, you will not see them, but you will be able to feel them. Not necessarily easily. You can only feel them with pressure, where before you could just feel it, just quick run the hand down the back. With your body condition 4, if you're looking at them, this is where you're starting to notice that your animal may be starting to become a little tubby. They're not waddling around because they're so fat yet, but they're getting there. Visual appraisal, you're going to see a rounding to the top of their back as you look at them. You have to press to be able to find the spinal process. And with your body condition score of 5, these guys are tubbies. You look out there, they look fat, and they are fat. And the thing with the body condition score, the upper side of a 2 to the lower side of a 4 puts them in a health condition that doesn't cause undue problems for them. You get to a 1 or a 5, and they're definitely going to have problems. If you're on the lower side of a 2, the upper side of a 4, they're definitely going to have problems. Just think, it's just like us as humans. You know, if we're at our ideal body, our ideal body weight, we have a lot of energy, we're generally fit, we're healthy, we feel well. You start getting on the skinny side of that to where we're underweight, you don't feel as well about yourself. And if you're on the upper side of that, you're above your ideal body weight, you may get winded easier. You just don't want to move around much because you're carrying a lot of extra weight. Your feet hurt, you don't feel good. Animals are the same way. Keep them in the body condition score that's ideal for them, and they're nice and productive. If they get outside of that body condition score, they're not as productive for you. I have a few links up here for nutrition. And the Sheep 101 site, I like their site. It's Maryland Extension. They have a fairly good website there, just kind of going over all things sheep.